The next thing is a very popular role-playing genre with lots of great things, horror. And we're going to go with the ultimate atypical horror game, Call of Cthulhu, and Carolyn's going to talk to us about it.
Excellent. Yeah, so I didn't think I actually liked the horror genre until we did our Pelgrane Press Q&A, and I realized that I pretty much exclusively play horror genre. When I heard horror, I thought, oh, that's, blood, gore, the really blockbuster-y type stuff that you see in the movies. But the way that we think about horror in role-playing games is really the mystery, the build up to the moment where you are fighting the big bad. And Call of Cthulhu is one of those classic horror games. Hopefully everyone can kind of see that cover there. Is it backwards? Probably backwards. Nope.
No.
Cool. So Call of Cthulhu is based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft. I think Cthulhu, Lovecraftian type games have been popular for a long time. My game group plays this one pretty regularly. I like that this came right after Jason talking about Traveler and the character development there, because the character development is so different in Call of Cthulhu. There are all the skills, all of them. You can do any type of skill imaginable. You can create your own skills. And it does become a little overwhelming. And it's very different than some of those more narrative-based games, or even D&D, where you have a very specific set of skills that are limited. Call of Cthulhu is all about having a wide variety of skills. The other thing about the characters in Call of Cthulhu is that they are pretty fragile. This is not meant to be a game where you are fighting the big bad. This is meant to be a game where you're trying to prevent the big bad from coming out. It's very much about the mystery and investigation. The big bads are bad. They will kill you. They will kill your character. So you're always trying to figure out ways so that you don't have to get to that big climatic end. But it's still very engaging. If you don't love doing combat all the time and you're more interested in mystery and investigation, I think this is a great option. Trying to think about any other kind of unique pieces to this game. Is anybody else on our team has done Call of Cthulhu that thinks there's something special?
I don't know so much, like I've not played it, but that's one of my significant other's favorite game, and he plays it a lot, and he's in like a group that only meets at Gen Con every year, and they keep playing it. And the way he always described it is like, you'll die, but a lot of it is trying not to go insane too. And then the hilarity that ensues when characters actually go insane, and how once characters start going insane, like how that can derail the scenario and scene and things like that. And then you're also fighting against trying to keep the big bad from coming through, but you're also like fighting against your own like friends around the table because they're insane and things like that. So I thought that was a very interesting dynamic of the group, because then you do end up playing against each other sometimes, depending on the situation.
Yeah. One of the other aspects is the luck feature, where you kind of have a pool of points that you can just pull from. So if you're really wanting to make something happen, you can use some of those luck points and burn them to help you out. However, running out of luck is not a good thing in the game either. So you have that kind of tension and balance of trying to get things done and win, but also, again, not go insane.
I also want to say there are many variations of the Cthulhu genre. Call of Cthulhu is the most popular, but there are things like Pulp Cthulhu, Trail of Cthulhu, Achtung Cthulhu, all of which are little variations on the theme, and some use different systems. One of my favorite variations is Cthulhu Dark. It is a very simple one-page role-playing system. All the rules fit on the front of one sheet of paper. That's also your character sheet at the same time. The number one rule is if you fight something, you die. There's no rolls. There's nothing else. You just die. The tiger rips your face off. Whatever it is, if you fight, you're dead. So it encourages a lot of things to run away or hide or do things to not have to face that eventuality.
I will say, if that's your thing, that's awesome. But if you are looking for the more combat heavy, Pulp Cthulhu is probably your better bet. It's a little bit more like Indiana Jones. Your characters are tougher. They can take some hits. You probably still don't want to go up against Cthulhu. But if you want to still have that combat part of your gameplay, I think Pulp Cthulhu is the best option.
I'm going to recommend Achtung Cthulhu, which is where you're playing in pre-World War II and World War II as the Allies fight against the Nazis. And the Nazis have all these occult secret societies that are trying to basically do very Cthulhu-esque things, and you are trying to fight them as part of an Majestic or Department M, either as British or American kind of investigators. But you do have combat skills that you can call on, and you do also have things like howitzers, because it's World War II, and mortars, and other things like that. Call of Cthulhu is a very broad genre. There are tons of variations. I think it's on the 7th or 8th edition of Call of Cthulhu, and they aren't as different as D&D editions are from one another. They're just variations that have come up, and it's like, okay, we're going to tweak this rule this time, and luck points are one way to do that. But the insanity system and that vast array of skills has remained consistent from all editions.
All right. Amanda, you're up next with the World of Darkness.
Woohoo. Yes, World of Darkness is like trying to stay top level and just succinct about World of Darkness feels like nearly impossible, but I will try, and I will also welcome any chiming in because I'm relatively new to the World of Darkness. But it is definitely one of those systems that leans more into the horror aspect of things. I've been to multiple games where we had to like take people aside at the beginning and be like, this story is going to get dark. Is everyone okay with these directions that we are going? Because it can go places. There's a bunch of different settings and games within World of Darkness. And the ones that I have played are Vampire, Mage, and Scion. I feel like Scion is probably the most lighthearted. It's kind of like Percy Jackson sort of feel, where you're the offspring of gods and you've got cool powers and embracing your divinity and all that kind of thing. But the other one and werewolf, I've kind of skirted the edges of werewolf so far, but vampire is one of the ones that I've been a little more involved with, and it has such like a rich history of not only like the lore, but players that have established timelines that are like basically canon if you get into the LARP scene, where you have to like educate yourself on what has gone on in each city if you're going to join each city. And I don't even want to go into that because that's a whole nother thing, but it's pretty cool if you want to just dive into something that is really deep and rewarding, and you don't mind the darker side of games sometimes. But as far as the system, it's a D10 system as well. And in this one, unlike 7th Sea that I described, where you're adding up everything, the GM will set like a difficulty. And so whatever dice you roll that are above that number, you get to count how many successes you have. And there's a whole bunch of, I feel like I'm just pulling from so many different games at once as I'm thinking of them. But of course, with Vampire, you are struggling against your inner beast as you're playing. There's a bunch of different vampire clans that if you have, certain preferences from almost like a D&D perspective of like, well, I like to be a fighter brawler kind of thing. Okay, well, there's a clan for that. No, I'd rather be like a sneaky rogue type that's gonna do subterfuge. There's magic users essentially and illusionists and stuff like that. And also one of the main, like, there's definitely some interesting combat that has happened in our vampire games, but one of the main focuses that I think people who have played would agree is political. Like, it's very the clans, how they interact together, and just like trying to keep a balance of relations and all of that kind of thing. And also keeping up what is called the masquerade of, trying not to let the normal world know that vampires are a thing. I have only played Vampire the Masquerade. There are different versions, of course. Show and tell. I happen to have a Dark Ages book, even though I have not played Dark Ages yet. But yes. The other one that I have played is Mage, which the magic system completely confused my group. But I know there are others here that have had much better success. But it's just, I really like a lot of just how the system and the lore and character building and the D10 system they use is, I think, one of the most like beginner friendly kind of systems I've stumbled upon, of where like it just seems to click with everyone. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I roll these. That's how it works. Cool. But yes, I could go in depth even more, but I think I will cut myself off there and let anyone else with more experience chime in on World of Darkness.
The only thing I'm gonna say about World of Darkness, we were kind of chatting. I was chatting about it with Jason and Amanda before this event started. Was that my group has always been very open and allowing like all of like the expanded universe of games to be included in. So when we've done our World of Darkness games, they've always allowed for all of the books. So at one table we had vampires, we had mage, we had werewolf, and I think changelings. And when you mix them all together, it is very easy to break the system and break the game. And we have stolen the souls of 2 different GMs because they allowed us to have all of that together. And when you mix mage and vampire and werewolf at one table and you have all of those rule sets, things kind of descend into chaos. And we literally had a mage entire world timeline, and our GM just closed his book and was like, we can't continue because literally you broke time. So I will say that it's a lot of fun, and if you're down for chaos, it's really easy to descend into chaos in that system. But my word of advice is that if you want to get groups together, if you play it or run it, keep it to like 1 or 2, like either vampire and werewolf or mage and werewolf. But just know that mage and werewolf have some big I don't know, bard lifting up the rest of your fighters, and it can go chaos anyway. Mage just makes everything chaotic. So that was just my one piece of advice, is maybe not allow all of them at once at the same table.
I've had quite a lot of experience with World of Darkness over the past 3 decades. I adopted Vampire almost immediately after it came out, and it quickly became one of my favorite games. Vampire has a lot of personal horror, and that's why we put it in the horror category. We also considered putting it into the superhero category because you basically play all these supernatural creatures with all sorts of cool powers. And you can play it very much as that sort of thing. Do it is horror. And the reason it's called the World of Darkness is you don't have to know anything about, hey, this is the world outside my window. We're going to set it in Cincinnati today, and that's what, and we're going to play vampires. And you've just been embraced, and you know nothing about vampire society. Go, and you just start there, and you learn about the fight between your humanity and the beast. You learn about all the different politics going on, and the theme of vampire is really that personal horror of humanity versus the beast. That's one of the key things there. And you'll also see it in just about every edition of Vampire, including the most recent one, 5th edition, that came out 2 or 3 years ago. Werewolf is a different type of game where you're basically playing people that have lost a war and are desperately trying to hang on to what little gains they've made. It is totally different themes than Vampire. Uses a similar dice system but goes 180 degrees a different direction and has a totally different agenda and very, very different. And it's kind of cool, but you do get cool powers, and you do have the opportunity to really change the world if that's your thing. You can really get into it and make world-leaping changes for the better, and it makes you feel like a good person. I have a lot of experience with Mage. Mage, the main theme is hubris, where, sorry, I'm reading the chat, where you have the ability to do anything as a mage. The core concept behind it is, if you could do anything in the world, what would you do? And then it becomes, what are the consequences for doing that? What comes back on me for changing the world? And sometimes does my ability to change the world become so overwhelming that I lose track of my own humanity and believe myself to be better than everybody else? And is what I'm thinking the right thing to do actually the right thing to do? And there are other versions of World of Darkness. There are Wraith, where you play basically somebody who's died. And then you play Changeling, the Dreaming, where you play as half human, half phase. And there's Demon the Fallen, there's Hunter the Reckoning, where you can play different types of characters. In addition to the World of Darkness, there is the Chronicles of Darkness.
Jason, we're getting pretty close to time. I think we probably want to move on to some of the other games that we have.
Yes, we do. Let's move on to Dresden Files.
We knew this would happen. We're so passionate about all of these games. So I'll try and make Dresden a little bit quicker. So Dresden Files game is based off of the book series by Jim Butcher, the Dresden Files book series. We have it classified in horror, but it could also kind of fit in fantasy because it's wizards and fae and things like that. But it's in modern world. So it's basically, if you don't know Dresden, he is a warlock in modern Chicago and all of the chaos that can ensue from that in the book series. So the game runs off of the Fate core system. The RPG runs off of the Fate core system. And I'm not going to go too much into Fate because we are actually talking about that system later on in this. But there are 3 types of Fate. There's Fate core, there's Fate accelerated, and Fate, what is it, condensed or something like that? Yeah, Fate
condensed.
So Fate is a rule system that is open source that you can take it into any campaign or any kind of story that you want. It's out in the world for people to use, but it focuses more on storytelling. So the Fate system really gives you enough rules to be able to determine if it's possible for somebody to do something, but it still requires the players to tell the story, to explain how something happens, to explain how they know each other, to explain how this thing that they want to do and they want to run and make this jump attack would actually work, and how their skills in their backstory play into that. And then just the few rules that are in Fate then allow you to roll to see if you succeed or fail. Now, I will say that Fate system runs on specialty dice called fudge dice that have either a positive, a negative, or a blank. And it's usually a set of 4 that come with each set. So it kind of gets fun and interesting with the Fate system. Now, I know, for example, I'm just going to call Amanda out. Amanda and her group loves Dresden Files, but they don't like Fate. So you guys admitted it to another system. And that's the cool thing that I did want to point out about, like, a lot of the systems, like Powered by the Apocalypse and Fate that we talk about. A lot of these, you can kind of take your story and your world and fit them into a system that you like better. So I'm actually not going to talk anymore about Dresden, since we're talking about Fate a little bit later. So I will allow that one to move on. That's Carolyn with
The other thing I want to
Oh, sorry.
The other thing I want to say about Fate, real quick, and Dresden Files, is an extremely well-written book. It has gotten awards for the writing. It is very comprehensive and very engaging, and there are little post-it notes on the edge, and just to pick up the book to read is interesting. But we're going to continue under Urban Shadows with Carolyn, which solves all the problems of putting vampires, mages, and werewolves together.
That's true. Yeah, and when you all were talking about World of Darkness, I was like, well, Urban Shadows has every single one of those types of characters. It is a Powered by the Apocalypse game, so as Jason was saying earlier, it uses 2d6. A 10 plus is a success. A 7 to 9 is your mixed success, and then a 6 or lower is typically some sort of failure. This is probably my favorite game. I think that the character archetypes are really interesting. This is my favorite character to play, the Oracle. As Jason was saying, with the Powered by the Apocalypse, you have playbooks. And what I really like about those is they are just one really big sheet of paper that has all of the information you could ever need about your character. And it just prints out really pretty. You can customize things, but it doesn't get overwhelming like those Call of Cthulhu games. You have only a certain amount of options, and they can be limiting, but I like having a lot of, not a lot, but like some amount of limitations. I think helps you be a little more creative about your character. A couple of the really special things about this is the way in which you make connections between other characters at your table. A session 0 is really important for this game, because you're not just creating your character in a vacuum, you're creating your characters together. One of the things you do is something called debts. And you go around the table and you figure out who you owe a debt to and who owes a debt to you. And that really changes the dynamic of how those characters interact. And it creates a backstory that between those characters. And then one of the other things I really like is something called an intimacy move. And that's where because this is a more narrative-based game where you kind of describe what you're going to do and then you roll based on what the GM tells you to roll, you can have these really deep connections between characters that create some sort of intimate moment. And I'm not just talking like romantic intimacy. I'm talking like becoming friends with someone or trusting them with something very important. And you get bonus perks for doing intimacy moves. And I think that makes it much more character driven as a narrative game than some of the other ones that we've talked about today. And just before we move on, I do have like 3 other Powered by the Apocalypse games just hanging out on my table. So you can tell that is my favorite system.